is a map from our green team, green infrastructure team, and the regional context of 3 rivers, 3 countries, supported local agriculture for food security, concentrated economic activities, guided urban growth for quality of environment, enhanced quality of daily life, and community harmony. So this broader context includes the surrounding territory. We have, in our walking, found only 1 block of concentrated historic wooden buildings in the old city. This is a great diminution of the resources of Edirne. And this block, as well as the isolated wood structures, needs to have incentives to keep it moving into the future as a vital group of structures for commercial and residential use into the future. I'd like to give a quick example of the Mensala here neighborhood. It's typically narrow streets with all uses happening in the street: pedestrian, bicycle, vehicle, dance, weddings, daily life. I forgot horses. Horses need to be added. And this area is surrounding an important mosque, and what we see is the beginning of some higher structures. As the land rises, the structures are also perhaps popping up, and there's an important issue here of keeping the structures under the height of the dome and retaining the views, the upward views to the mosque. So it's our understanding that there are few building controls, that the Roma people build their own structures, and that the permit process is not necessarily followed, and that process needs to be thought about more carefully to bring the neighborhood forward within the context of the mosque. So one of the things we challenged each of the teams to do was to think about some simple first steps. So simple first steps for this Roma neighborhood is clean up the garbage, plant and care for the green space, and in this case, at this location, make a path that would be going uphill toward the mosque. And the second little project, which may take some time to generate, is to restore this fountain, which was given in the past by some philanthropic family for the whole of the community of Edirne. And in this case, we're talking about restoring the structure and the water, hopefully doing that with local people. Finding someone who is a builder in the neighborhood, looking to train youth in the traditional skills. In many places, traditional skill building for the young generation is happening, and we can offer some examples of that. The other pieces of this is to make an appropriate curb so that there's some definition of space around this fountain. It's our thought that if this were restored, it would become a place where people meted, greeted, and visited with each other as a part of continuing to build community. The other piece of this in many low-income neighborhoods is to appoint caretakers. If the work is done with local labor, and if there's local caretakers, the graffiti does not come. The damage and vandalism does not occur. So here are some sketches that our colleague created of the ways that this neighborhood could look, improved into the future, with pride in a shared landscape, with controlled growth, with improved sanitation, and added open space and public plantings to make this neighborhood stronger for the people who are there. So with that, the whole approach is culture as a sustainable development driver and enabler, and what we seek is continuity of historic urban identity and values as daily life, social and economic activity proceeds and environmental quality is secured. And in this case, in the Edirne city and territory. area. Our goal here for all of us is to define initial steps for the management according to the UNESCO Hull comprehensive vision and move it forward in the here and now. With that, I'll shift over to the next presenter, the team leader for Heritage Assets, Greg DeVries, and he'll speak to his piece.
Good night. I'm Greg DeVries, and the topic is Heritage Assets, specifically views. We worked with a fantastic team, which are mainly on this side of the room. So the first question that we'd like to answer to talk about the topic of this is, what is a heritage asset? It's both things as well as traditions and processes. Heritage assets have values, and they're varied, and they overlap. Also, heritage contributes to a sense of place because it's a shared idea. The two main groups that we divide them into, again, are the things and also the traditions and customs. Here is a list of the things. Everything from natural systems and hydrology and topography through land uses, vegetation, circulation, water features, buildings in terms of how they apply to the landscape, smaller structures, and then the smaller elements of the landscape. We just chose one, which is views and visual relationships to approach. In terms of immaterial or intangible heritage, this can include everything from festivals and dance, the oil wrestling, to the symbols, the very symbols that embody the essence of Edirne, such as the Lamia Mosque, which was one of the focal points of our visual study. An essential baseline topic and exercise for the historic urban landscape approach is conducting an inventory of what is important and what remains and what these items do. Essentially, a heritage asset inventory is a enumerated list and a map of showing where these items are. So why do one? Because they show the patterns, they identify areas with different characters, and it's also very useful to then use this resource as a way to target strategic interventions in different places when you have all these layers of information. So the methodology that we used, we took two examples, two projects, and one is entry views from far away, looking at primary approaches that visitors use, as well as some significant approaches to the central city from nearby, from within. In that case, we looked at cultural resources, natural resources, and modern elements and infrastructure. The second study was one of visual character of streetscapes at the interface of the entire mosque complex with its varied neighborhoods. We divided into a team, 4 different groups for that study, and then looked at the characteristics of the streetscapes. So, in terms of the larger views, we looked at the Istanbul Road approach, the Ghazni Bridge, and Kapıkule. We went to the Bulgarian border and then drove back as if we were coming from the other side to see what that experience was like and what views were available and aspects of that. Kiyuk approach and Karaj, and then also around the train station, which is a relatively obscured view because it's in a very built-up area, but around that area there are significant views of the city. In the first case, we looked at the Istanbul Road and looked at when does the central historical core become dominant. And it's completely appropriate in some places to have billboards like these, and in other places it's not. So perhaps in this very location, it's okay. Maybe they should be somewhere else, but it's something to consider. One thought is, from where those photos were taken, that was relatively close to the university. An area that has high-speed traffic and many students and people trying to cross the road. So one thought is to use plantings along the sides of the street to slow traffic slightly. And yes, this slightly obscures views toward the central city, but then at a point of decompression, the view can open up and the historic core can be revealed. From the south, the view across the bridge is currently under construction, and this was a specific view that includes the journey from Bulgaria through Kapitoli into the city in this direction, and we'll use this as an example at the end of the presentation. But there are also important views toward the city from this direction. In Kyrk, again, this is the urban area, and there's a high concentration of development and high buildings. Street decorations should be considered within the viewscape as well. In some places, they are fine and appropriate and add to city life. In other places, they obscure views and may not be appropriate. That has to be considered. In Karaj, the view across the bridge is very appealing. There are also some issues with transportation and with access and ability to move. One of the recommendations is to encourage additional bicycle use and also consider the UNESCO plans for bicycle routes in the area. If the area is to be cleared of its car park functions, then that use has to be located in another adjacent place that's also convenient for people and accessible as well. So that's a consideration. In the field south of the train station, it presents a nice form of the city, and you can see the steps and where visual intrusions occur, but also how the original historic core was formed. So in summary, the distant view recommendations are to focus on their importance in identifying to the residents and to visitors the city identity, and to keep that in context when proposing new projects. The visual character is very important and strong, and that can be reinforced with appropriate planning, but it also could be lost if appropriate measures were not considered. So the second project that we looked at are the surrounds of the Selimiye Mosque complex, specifically the interface with the streetscapes of the communities in the surrounding neighborhoods. We divided into 4 teams to cover the ground effectively, and in the first area, which is the newer development area, we observed a number of potential issues as well as opportunities to work in that area. And I'll go through each 4 fairly quickly and just point out a couple of examples. So it's outside the plan of protection for the World Heritage Site, yet it remains very close to the edge of the park. So it should be considered within a larger framework of planning for the city. One opportunity there is to expand the visual buffers through plantings. In Area 2, it's a diverse area full of official buildings as well as residential structures, and there are a few small neighborhood views that are important and useful for the residents, and these could be enhanced or protected. In other places where there's large residential structures or incompatible modern structures, again, a planting could buffer these areas. Here are some examples of small views where neighborhood character is present, as well as where small views are visible in different areas, as well as some examples where there are obstructions and where planting opportunities exist. Area 3 to the north is the former Ottoman settlement and area of development. You can see that we have a list of great potential for this area because of its intact character and qualities. The 34 registered examples of vernacular architecture are important. There are many suggestions for preservation of this rich heritage. One thought that we had in looking at the potential as well as ways to preserve that is to encourage an architectural walking route through the historic streetscape that touches on these factors. In Area 4, it's a diverse area with a lot of vibrant city life, and we saw that as a positive asset, yet certain buildings and certain functions compete and conflict with the mosque complex. These could be enhanced in different ways, and gradually certain features and functions could be replaced in time. But it's important to maintain the vibrant urban life that exists. So overall, we have a few recommendations for different aspects of the entire surroundings, and I'll just touch on a few of them. One is to provide sufficient protection for the monumental trees and highlight these trees of the historic area. There are a few examples of quite venerable trees that have been standing the test of time and provide a distinctive character. They should be allowed to continue and not impeded with development. For urban furniture and equipment, these small-scale elements, bring them in harmony over time through a phased process, if possible, would bring the surrounding areas in greater unity or accentuate the characteristics of each area. Another suggestion is to eliminate the dominance of the military and administrative buildings with careful design interventions. So that also is a very focused study of a different sort. For buildings themselves, incorporating the design considerations that respect the urban historic fabric in terms of height, material, and architectural style should continue to be studied and enforced. Moving on to an example of one of the studies that we did in detail is looking at the route from Bulgaria to Edirne and how one travels along that. I'll just quickly go through this. There's a new plan for improving the highway system along the border and coming from Bulgaria to Edirne and through. In that process, there should also be additional considerations for the views, because we see these as an introduction and an entry into the city. So in this process, there are a few simple approaches that could help teach people about the identity of Edirne and reveal its charm prior to arrival. We looked at possibilities for this along the old Roman Via Militaris and the ambassador's route, which carried Western European diplomats to Istanbul. It also follows the Sultan's Trail, which brought the Eastern armies to the west. So that's the overview, and in yellow is all of Edirne. This is a view from the side of the road here, and it shows how the city form presents itself. And this is a wonderful opportunity to engage visitors in both the natural resources as well as the cultural resources as a preview to entry to the city. This is a simulation of a very simple lay-by that could be done on either a highway or a smaller road as a kind of cultural patrimony route. It does not have to be paved, it could be gravel, but simple signage could illuminate the history of the city and its character. This helps to celebrate its natural heritage and cultural heritage and engage visitors when coming from Bulgaria to Turkey. A closer view from the same place reveals that The Salumia Mosque and other traditional skyline features still dominate the view. There are other items that compete, but they are still small scale in comparison to the traditional view. So this should be preserved. As you approach closer to the city, the view crossing the bridge is cluttered with numerous obstacles. Granted, this is a construction setting, but it needs to be considered. And in the end, reorganizing the landscape features to preserve the character, this is the same view with a number of items removed, can present a clearer city identity and help facilitate the travel within. Thank you.
So we're about halfway through, and if we have any questions or anybody wishes to make any comments about those two presentations, we'd be happy to welcome that.
Or you can wait until the end and ask questions. Totally up to you. Okay, we'll move.
We're good. Okay. Jim Donovan will do the transportation.
Thank you. Good night. We welcome all of our sponsors. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and experience this wonderful city and to work with our Turkish colleagues. The Transportation Equity Team was a little bit smaller than the other team, or most of the other teams. We just had 4 individuals. They were all landscape architects working on the project. And I, as Jim Donovan, was somewhat leading it. We think that transportation is an important part of looking at the overall city because it ties everything together, it helps people move around the city, and that a good transportation system helps the economy, helps the community, and keeps Edirne moving into the future successfully. In most transportation systems around the world, and we're not saying that this is the case here and you're bad or whatever, this is pretty much the way it is everywhere, is that drivers of motor vehicles pretty much are the top of the line for transportation movement. Beyond that, typically then is sort of larger vehicles, bus riders. Below that might be bicyclists. Below that might be actually other things that get put into the transportation corridor. And finally, there might be walkers, horses, horse carts, and things like that way down at the bottom. And we've sort of looked at this in terms of these 4 or 5 modes of transportation. And the desirable way to actually have that happen in most cities that have really successful transportation systems is to keep walkers at the top. Everybody is a pedestrian, and recognizing the fact that since we are all pedestrians, we are the primary people using the system, at some time or another we should have priority. Below that is other types of self-motivated movement, bicyclists. Below that would be things that move a lot of people at the same time, such as buses or trains. And then lastly, those that are moving around in individual vehicles. It doesn't say that they're not important, it's just that they don't get everything, they don't get the top of the line consideration. Most successful transportation systems around the world have 7 characteristics. They are usually providing a complete system that is connected. The different types of modes work well together. You can move from one to the other easily. It's easy to see how you move around the city. And it's also very safe, and it projects a secure feeling while you're using it. They're non-competitive, so that you don't have to fight with some of the other modes to use a space, and that they're very inviting. They help people, they invite people to actually use them. The purpose of our study in terms of looking at Edirne from the transportation point of view was to primarily identify the system, identify some of the issues around the system, find ways that we might be able to provide improvements or recommendations for improvements that would promote better transportation overall and would promote better cooperation between the different types of modes. When we did our work, we did it basically through observing the community, looking at different areas, different samples. We obviously couldn't cover the entire area, so we picked sample areas to look at, sample types of facilities, look at the materials, how did they connect together. We were lucky enough to talk to some of the officials. They were very helpful and very cooperative in giving us information on what they knew. We talked a lot among ourselves, the four of us, in terms of how these things work together. After looking at a lot of the information, we realized that there was a lot more planning going on for the train system and for the car system, and that there was not enough time to focus on the pedestrian systems and the bicycle systems, and even some of the bus systems that you have here. So we decided to focus our work primarily on those three areas. So we'll focus the rest of our talk on those areas. It doesn't mean, again, that the others aren't important, but because we had such limited time, we had to focus our energy. There are a lot of good things about the transportation system in Edirne right now. And again, looking at walking and bicycling and busing, we tried to highlight some of the things that are really going well. Say for pedestrians, there's an excellent pedestrian zone down in the historic area that's working very well. For bicyclists, unlike almost every other city in the world, bicycling is not considered a bad form of transportation. It seems to be used by everybody in the city, not necessarily a lot of them, but it's across business people, school children, workers, so that it's well accepted, and there's actually a lot of support that we're finding for more bicycling facilities. For the busing, you are unfortunately suffering from success. It's one of the most successful new bus systems we've seen operating. Therefore, that creates some problems, but the problems you can deal with because you're success. Most places put a bus system in and it runs around empty. You don't have that problem, which is great. An example here is the bus system. It's fairly well covered. There's a lot of routes, and there's a lot of buses running on those routes so that they're continually served. And even at that, they're running full, which is a wonderful problem to have. Again, the pictures of the pedestrian zone downtown, and it's well used. Everybody's out there all during different times of the day, and there's a lot of activity and a lot of economic activity going on here. These things can actually be enhanced. You've got a good start, you can build on them and move forward, such as, say, the pedestrian zone we just looked at. Look at that pedestrian zone, try to understand what really works, why does it work, what's making it work, and then use that information to slowly expand it through the city in appropriate locations. For bicycling, basically sort of begin to have a a bicycling coalition that might begin to promote bicycling. Have a promotion campaign, since it's already well accepted, a campaign that helps bicyclists, people